Well, we are dropping into the middle of Genesis, and so whether you're on the reading plan or not, I thought it'd be good to give us a little recap of where we find ourselves. And so we used to do an improv game called Movie in a Minute, and so I'm going to do Genesis in 3 minutes. Well, it's pretty close to 3 minutes, so we'll see if I can make it. So Genesis begins with God making the world and humans in love and anticipation, and he sets Adam and Eve into the garden with purpose and his presence, and it was very good. And then it doesn't take long before people choose sin. They disobey, rebelling against their good king, and there's consequences. But God promises a plan of rescue and redemption in the midst of the curse. And so humans are cast out of the garden to live in a broken world under the curse, but God has this plan of redemption. And the damage is significant in the world. There's murder and hatred and violence and discord. We see it in all these stories, Cain and Abel and other stories. The destruction continues and expands for generations until finally God is so grieved over what he'd made. And the world is destroyed in a flood. It's the story of Noah. And God demonstrates grace by saving Noah and his family. And then people inhabit the world again and migrate and nations form, and there's all this stuff going on. And God steps into the middle of it and chooses Abraham. And he makes a promise to him, and Abraham believes that promise. The promise is that I will make you a great nation, like the sand on the seashore and the stars of the sky. And I will bless you so that you will be a blessing to the whole world. And again, this promise of redemption through the line of Abraham. But there's a problem. Sarah, his wife, is barren. And so they wait and they wait and they wait and eventually take matters into their own hands, some misplaced efforts, and you end up with the story of Hagar and Ishmael being born. But Ishmael's not the child of promise, and so they wait, and eventually, miraculously, Isaac is conceived, the child of promise. And as the story goes on, Abraham, in a moment of testing, is willing to lay down Isaac on the altar. And he does this because he knows Yahweh so well that he's able to trust completely that Yahweh will make a way where there doesn't seem to be a way. And he passes the test. And then the story goes on. Sarah dies, and Abraham sends his servant to go get a wife for Isaac in the old country. And he brings her back, and it's a whole love story. And then we find ourselves in Genesis chapter 25. How'd I do? Anyone timing? Pretty close, right? Yeah. It's not the whole of Genesis, it's just the first part. But we're going to undertake the story of Jacob, the life of Jacob. We're calling it a wrestle to trust, and it's this epic adventure. And I hope and trust by the end of it that we'll have moved a little bit. And maybe two things. Number one, that Jacob's lifetime struggle to trust and believe that Yahweh really is faithful to accomplish his purpose, and that Jacob's long, slow transformation, messy transformation to this same end, it is very much like our own human struggle. I hope we can come to the point of understanding that. And secondly, that we would recognize God is faithful to accomplish all that he sets out to do. In spite of the mess and the human failing, God is big enough, he's gracious enough, he is loving enough to see it all through. That's the story. So let's do it. Let's jump in. Genesis chapter 25 is where we're starting, verses 19 to 34. It starts like this. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son, Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and the sister of Laban, the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." When the time came for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, just like you want every baby to be. And so they named him Esau, which means hairy. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob, or heel grabber. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished," which is why he was also called Edom, which means red. Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is a birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. And this is God's word. Oh, so good. So good. My big idea this morning is God's choosing is a hopeful grace story. God's choosing is a hopeful grace story. This is a story about barrenness becoming a blessing. We had some friends, good friends, who were an exemplary couple. They're amazing people, just loving and kind and wonderful. They loved and served Jesus. He became the youth pastor, and then they went on following Jesus and just following his purpose and intention for their lives, and it was very beautiful. But they, despite their desire and their wanting, couldn't seem to conceive a child. And so they got married before Lauren and I got married, and then we had Maddie, and then we had Elijah, and then we had Gabe, and still they couldn't seem to have a child. And so we prayed and we prayed and we prayed, and they had prophetic words over them, and they went and did every medical thing they could do, and had a great doctor helping them, and it just never seemed to produce a child. And this was a source of great disappointment and struggle in their lives. And finally, after 10 and a half long years, we found out that our friend Carly was pregnant. And Kayla was born a month before Mael, and they became good friends and are friends to this day. Kayla was the first of their 3 children. Their other 2 were named Tehala and Judah. Beautiful blessing. And this is also a story that happens throughout the Bible. There's barrenness that does result at some points in babies. Abraham and Sarah is one of those stories. Now they're old and barren, but and then they conceive Isaac. And Hannah's barrenness gives birth to Samuel, and Manoah's barren wife to Samson. And later, barren Elizabeth miraculously gives birth to John the Baptist. Now, my question is, why isn't this easier for them? Aren't they the people of promise? I don't understand why it's so hard. Rebekah, when she leaves her family to go with that servant to meet Isaac and marry him, they sing a song as she leaves. And the song they sing is this: "Our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s." It's the blessing they would sing over one another. It's what they hoped for each other. Rebekah, may you become thousands of 10,000s. And later, after they're married, maybe in the dark, maybe Isaac would whisper about a nation that would bless the entire world. This promise, a promise of sand and stars. And then nothing. There's a lot of barrenness in this story, a story about making a nation. In fact, Ishmael has 12 kids to Isaac's 0. Why isn't life easier? Isn't this our frequent question? And we jump to the end of the Bible stories and think, wow, it was so easy for them, it's so hard for me. We jump over passages like Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. And we forget to insert between these two sentences that there's 20 years of waiting. 20 years where Isaac becomes an intercessor, where he learns to pray. And month after month, he experiences the hope and the disappointment as he waits and waits to see a promise. From age 40 to age 60, when they have Isaac. And then when Rebekah finally conceives, oh, the happiness, except for the Hebrew language graphically says, the children smash themselves together inside her. Like, is this experience she has, and she literally asks, why is this happening to me? He's like, well, you just prayed for this. What do you mean? Not this. This is different. Like, this is crazy. And maybe that's the question you're asking right now too, Rebekah's question. Why is this happening to me? Why am I barren? Why is this so hard? Why can't things go more smoothly? Why are there so many obstacles? Why is this taking so long? What about your promise, Yahweh? In Isaiah, God says in chapter 54, sing, barren woman. You who never bore a child, burst into song. Shout for joy, you who are never in labor, because more are the children of the desolate woman than of her who has a husband, says the Lord, Yahweh. And then this well-quoted passage, enlarge the place of your tent, stretch your tent curtains wide, do not hold back, lengthen your cords, strengthen your stakes, for you will spread out to the right and to the left, your descendants will dispossess nations and settle in their desolate cities. Sing, barren woman, sing, for God is doing something. And this is a story about brother babies. I'm going to alliterate my points today. Brother babies, it works. I had a brother, and I don't know if you had a brother, but having brothers is a weird thing. And I have two sons, and they're pretty close in proximity. And it's a strange thing to me because they have the same parentage, the same general genetic backdrop, the same environmental factors, similar experiences, and yet they are very different from one another. And my example is on the soccer field. So I grew up playing soccer, and so I was like, I want the boys to at least try soccer. So when Elijah was 5, I put him in soccer. And the first day, he just kind of was like, watched. And then the second day we played soccer, he was a hunter. And he's like, okay, this is the game. We take the ball and put it in the net, take the ball and put it in the net. And there's like kids wandering around picking their nose. They're like picking the dandelions. He's like ghost, he's like a competitor. He's got the scent of blood. He's like, that kid's weak. I'm going to go for him. Steal the ball. Go, score. And we'd be like, Elijah, slow down. Don't score so much. It's like not good what you're doing. You're so intense. And it didn't matter. He was impervious to the weather. He was always attacking or defending and moving, and he had this flair for it. And so I was very excited. I was like, oh, the Headleys are going to dominate. And so as soon as I could put Gabe in soccer, I was like, all right. And so I put Gabe in soccer, and he cried. And he just stood there, and he just cried. And then he'd be like, I don't want to go. I'm cold. So we had this whole thing. I was like, okay. And so this, but Gabe's our detail man. So the next year I was like, okay, I'm going to ask, do you want to go in soccer again or not? We're not going to force this. And Gabe was like, no, I want to try again. I want to try. And so I put him in soccer again, and it was a very different result. There'd be this crowd of kids around the ball, and Gabe just would stand out to the side. And I was like, oh, this again. And he would just watch. And he'd watch, and then the ball would pop out of the huddle, and then he'd run up, take the ball, and score. And I was like, whoa. And then he was like very strategic, not a movement wasted. He was always watching, and then boom, he would pounce on them. Like it was all strategy for him. There's no effort beyond the strategy. So it's a detail. And the reality is our story is about two very different brothers. One is a hunter and one is a stay-at-home strategist. And there's a promise spoken over them. When Rebecca goes to inquire about the MMA match in her womb, the prophet speaks about a nation in conflict, or nations in conflict. And the prophetic word comes, the older will serve the younger. Before they're born, this is the word. The older will serve the younger. Now, when I was younger and I started to go through the Bible and study, and I got to the patriarchs, I came to Abraham, and I was like, Abraham, he's a guy I could admire. I mean, he's a man of faith. He believed. He passed tests. He knows Yahweh. And it's the reference is always like the God of Abraham. Like, he's the guy, Abraham. Like, okay, he's a guy I can admire. And then I get to Isaac. Isaac, he's a guy I could respect. He's certainly, we would pick him over Ishmael, who's a hothead. He's not really a man of action, but he's faithful, and he keeps the faith, and he's an heir to the promise. I was like, I can respect Isaac. And then I got to Jacob. And I just, why Jacob? I struggled. Why not Esau? I would pick Esau. Esau is a man's man. He's hairy, and he has muscles, and he hunts, and he grunts, and he fights, and he wins, and he kills things, and he gets himself a woman or two, and he's dad's favorite. He's the eldest. He's the redneck. He's a man to follow, and people will. He's a man to forge a nation, and he does. He's like an action hero with a beard, basically. Jacob he's a mama's boy. That's a real picture. He's soft. He's a city boy, a heel grabber. He's the deceiver. He lost the first fight to be firstborn. He's secondborn. He already lost. He's a chef, not a chieftain. He's the trickster, the tricked, the traitor, the stew maker. He's a thief. He would make a better villain in the story. And I disdained him. I couldn't admire him. And I went to the Lord and I said, God, why on earth would you pick Jacob? And he said, because he's just like you. Because he's just like you. This is the human story. I mean, like us, Jacob is afraid. He's afraid he's going to have to claw his way through life to get ahead. And even then, that he won't amount to much. He's afraid that he doesn't really belong because he traded for his birthright. And next week, we'll see he steals the blessing. And he'll wrestle for it later in the dark because he's lived his whole life in shame that it wasn't really meant for him. Afraid even after God appears and speaks to him, promises after encounters and favor, he's still afraid. I mean, Jacob is so human, so utterly incapable of earning this. To God, Jacob is the perfect founder of a nation, so in need of his new name, so in need of this God, the perfect redemption story. No one is ever going to say, oh, Jacob did this. Yes, Jacob forged this nation from the sweat of his manly, hairy brow, or his good looks, or his raw leadership potential. But they will only say, if God could make a nation out of Jacob, surely he could make something out of me. This is God's choice. And Paul describes it as a grace story in Romans 9. He says, it is not the children by physical descent who are God's children, but it is the children of the promise. And then he breaks into this story. And he quotes from Malachi. And in Malachi, God tells the people of Israel that he loved them. And they said, well, how have you loved us? And then God breaks into this story. God chose Jacob before he was born, the younger, the second, before he could earn it or fail trying, before his name, rear guard, heel grabber, gets twisted into deceiver, trickster because of Jacob's activity and behavior. Before the whole mom and dad favoritism thing, God chose Jacob. And this is a grace story. And so it's an important story for you if you aren't sure if you deserve to be here, or if you struggle with shame or condemnation, or if you feel out of your depth in the community of faith. This is a story for you. This is the redemptive story of God, that before you existed, God chose you to be his child, not by coincidence or birth order or nationality or race or gift mix or achievement, but children of promise, rescued by Jesus for his good purposes. And this is a story about a belittled birthright. I read a story about Mark Cuban. He was the owner of the NBA Dallas Mavericks, and at the time of this story he was, and he's been on other shows as well. His personality is well known. I think he was on Shark Tank or one of those shows. And so in this encounter, he offered WGN, Chicago radio sport talk host, so from a different city, he offered David Kaplan $50,000 to change his name to Dallas Maverick. Okay? And when Kaplan politely declined, Cuban sweetened the deal. He said he would pay him $100,000 and $100,000 to his favorite charity if he would legally change his name for 1 year to Dallas Maverick. I mean, Dallas, that's not such a bad first name, right? For $100,000. And so he thought about this, and after some soul searching and being bombarded with emails from listeners who said, "You would be crazy not to do this. It's like free money. It's just 1 year." He responded, and he held firm and told him no. And this is what he said: "I'd be saying I'd do anything for money, and that bothers me. My name is my birthright. I'd like to preserve my integrity and credibility." If you had an offer like that presented to you, it would reveal something about you, what you care about or what's important to you. And we would say of Kaplan that he's a person of conviction because he stood his ground. There are defining moments that come in our lives, and there's one in this story. After all the wordplay on the names and the character descriptions, we get to a story, an actual story. Like there was this one time and then this defining moment. Or maybe it's like, how can I explain what my brother's like? Well, there was this one time, and you tell a story. What is Esau like? Well, we know that he's hairy because his name's Esau. We know he's red because of the nickname Edom. We know he's strong and he's skilled as a hunter. And from this story, we now know also that he's brash and impulsive and demanding and dramatic and short-sighted. In verse 30, he says in the New American Standard, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." Literally, the Hebrew reads, "Red stuff, this red stuff." It's like, wow, okay. I think one translation has the word please. It's like, I don't think that's a please. Red stuff, just give it to me. I remember my mom loves to tell this story about when I was in grade 8, and I was about to go out the door to school, and I had to walk quite far to school, but it just started snowing. And so she said, "Jonathan, do you want to take winter boots? Why don't you wear your winter boots? It's snowing." And I said, "No, Mom, I'm in grade 8. I'm not going to wear winter boots to school. What about a jacket?" "No, I'm not going to wear a jacket." "Come on, Mom." We got in this fight, and I walked out the door, and I was wearing, at the time where they were very cool, because I was very cool in grade 8, they were dock shoes, so very thin-soled, and like fabric, like a fabric, and they were slip-on, and there's a lot of sock showing. So kind of a flimsy shoe to begin with. And I went to school, and I walked out the door at the end of the school day, and it had been snowing hard all day, and there was lots of snow, and it was cold. And I was like, oh, so I'll catch the bus. So I walked down to catch public transit and waited at the bus stop. And by then, to get from the school to the bus stop, my feet are soaked, my shoes are soaked, I'm freezing. I'm like, oh, okay. The bus pulls up and keeps going because it's packed. It's over full already. And so it just drives past. fast. So I wait another 25 minutes. Oh my goodness, I'm so cold. Oh, like I should have worn the boots. And then, don't tell my mom that. And then the next bus comes and it too is packed and it goes right by. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so cold. So I went into the gas station and I called my mom. Mom, I really need you to pick me up. And she said, your dad has the car, so you're going to have to walk. That's it. And so I walked the whole way home. I was slushing, and I was like freezing cold. My mom's favorite part of the story is when I got to the house, I threw open the door, and I fell on my knees. And I shouted, doesn't anyone care that I'm dying? Just like that. She relishes in this story. And I'm very sure that if my little brother had showed up at that moment with a cup of hot chocolate, I would have traded my birthright for that hot chocolate. You know, we all have moments where we're short-sighted. We all have these times where we're focused on this moment instead of the big story. We all have that. So don't be mistaken that this story is about more than one moment for Esau. This is about his heart, and it's bigger than just this story. Esau trades his birthright. Like there's evidence in early cultures like this one that this happened. Not usually for a bowl of stew, I don't think, but it happened. People would trade the right of inheritance. Bruce Walkie says the father's inheritance is divided among the number of sons, and the firstborn always has the right to 2 of these portions. So for instance, if there were 9 sons, the firstborn would receive 2 portions, and the other 8 would split the 7 portions that remain. And then he says, if there are only 2 sons, the firstborn inherits everything. So that's possible. There's a value here. There's something, there's money, there's livestock, there's people, there's a lot involved here with the birthright and connected to the blessing. I watched a clip recently of a YouTuber going down the street. You know how they do this and they interview people? And he's offering people a chocolate bar. He says, do you want a chocolate bar or this bar of silver? It's like a silver bar, like not gold, but silver. And he says, which one do you want? And I know they're editing. I know they make it seem a certain way. But like repeatedly, video after video, there's people who choose the chocolate bar. And even at one point he says, you know, there's a jewelry store right here. We could walk into the jewelry store and we could appraise this silver bar. Are you sure you want the chocolate bar? And people say, yeah, no, I like chocolate. I want the chocolate bar. And they take the chocolate bar instead of the bar of silver. Like Jesus says, the kingdom is a treasure that if you knew the value, you would give everything you had for it. And Esau gives his part away for momentary pleasure. He despised his birthright, it says. And his actions tell us what he believes or doesn't believe about this God. He despises the things of God. And God values the heart. Jacob wants the birthright. A little bit earlier in the passage, it describes Jacob as a quiet man in the ESV, or the New American Standard says Jacob was a civilized man. And this word, translated different ways, the Hebrew means complete or perfect, which I'm glad they don't translate it that way because that would sound weird. Jacob was perfect, right? But it has 3 different meanings for this word. The first meaning is complete or perfect, like how we think of perfect. So one who lacks nothing in physical strength or beauty. So, okay. And the second meaning is someone who is sound or wholesome, an ordinary, quiet sort of person. And then the third meaning is someone who's complete or morally innocent, having integrity, one who's morally or ethically pure. So when I look at these 3 meanings for this word, definitely the first one we'd be like, okay, well, he's definitely lacking in some things. And I would say Esau seems like the better specimen. So not number 1 and not number 3, because we know if you read more of the story, Jacob lives in that gray zone morally. Like there's things he does that are very questionable. So number 2 fits, that he's sound or ordinary or a quiet person. And what we see between these two people is one person who doesn't really care about the birthright and the promise. He starts relationships with the pretty local Hittite girls, and he wants what he wants now. And he can't wait. The word to describe him repeatedly in all sorts of commentaries is profane. He is profane. He just doesn't care about the things of God. But Jacob does. I mean, he wants this more than anything. The wordplay in Hebrew indicates a cooking trap. Like he's thinking about, okay, every day he comes back and he's like this, so maybe I'll do this. Maybe today will be the day, and I'll tie down that birthright. Maybe today he'll give it away for nothing. Because Jacob wants it. Now, we're in a narrative story, and so that's the genre of literature we're reading. And so in a narrative, it just tells us what happened. So sometimes we get confused because we think like, well, does God approve of this part, or what about this part? And as we read through these stories, we need to know that the narrative describes what happened, and it doesn't always tell us how God felt about every part of it. It just describes the story. And in this case, we know from how it's written that Esau's disdain is bad, and Jacob's desire is good. How he gets there throughout the story will be another question. But with all his being, Jacob wants to be part of the story of God, and he will. In conclusion, God's choosing is a hopeful grace story. Things don't always come easy for people of promise. In fact, sometimes they come more slowly. But God is faithfully working out his plans and purposes in our lives. And when God chooses Jacob over Esau, it is grace. However we might feel about Jacob, we should know that his story is our human story. And we take hope that our story too is a grace story in which Jesus rescues and adopts us because of his goodness. And some of us might worry about rejected Esau. How's he doing? Until we see his heart on display. A profane man who disdains and despises the things of Yahweh. He just doesn't care. But Jacob wants this more than anything. He sees the value, and he wants to be part of God's story. And God, who always responds to willing hearts, loves this. He does. Let's pray. Jesus, I thank you for how you are working throughout the story of history and the universe to write something on our hearts. And Lord, even where we struggle maybe with Jacob and we want our heroes to be making better choices and to be perfect in many ways, Jacob is not like that. And yet we see through this story, and we will continue to see how faithful you are, how you hold us, even when we can't seem to do it ourselves. And how much you are working in every part of the story to fulfill your good purpose. Jesus, I pray that you would come even now and bring your comfort to our hearts, those of us who are in difficulty, that you would be near to us. We thank you that you are walking with us, and that as we respond to you, we see all that you're doing. Thank you, Lord. Amen.